episode of IndyCar today from a very rainy looking Glasgow. I'm not sure how long this weather's going to last, but according to my weather app, it's not supposed to last much longer. So hopefully we'll get back to some sunshine shortly. Now, sunshine's in pretty short supply politically at the moment, and although I haven't had much time due to other pressing needs with family and work, I noticed a couple of things which I think are worth pointing out today, and these are not the results of my own research. These are merely the work of other pro-independence bloggers who pointed these things out. Now, one person in particular who has hit the headlines recently is the leader of the English Labour Party in Scotland. That's Anas Sarwar, who has been demanding, this is absolutely true, demanding that the SNP duel the A9, presumably on the way to Inverness. Now, this is something which people have thought about for a long time, and it's something which is deemed necessary to help the safety of the A9. So that is one thing. And to be honest with you, there's been some really horrible things said in the British press here in Scotland. There was one report of a man who narrowly avoided being killed pulling out in front of traffic onto the A9. And basically, they were saying that the A9 was dangerous, and the gentleman concerned was not saying that the A9 was dangerous at all. But the fact is that they were using this man's experience of this incident as a stick to beat the SNP with. But what's the story here? I mean, dueling the A9 was a policy decision made by previous SNP administration many years ago. It was fully planned, it was fully funded, and it was ready to go. And the only reason it didn't happen was because Anas Sarwar's party and the other two parties of unionism, the Tories and the Liberal Democrats, ganged up to block it happening. They actually prevented the dueling of the A9 many, many years ago. And for Anas Sarwar to now come out with this is a bit rich. He's got a brass neck. He was his party was one of the parties that stopped the dueling of the A9 when it should have been done. So to claim that the SNP has dropped the ball on this is plainly ridiculous. The SNP made every effort to get the A9 duel. They had it all sorted, all funded and ready to go. And guess who stuck the spokes in the bicycle wheel? Well, you guessed it. It's the unionist parties. Everything that they do is designed to try to punish the SNP. So first of all, they say you should duel the A9. The SNP says we're going to duel the A9. And then those parties say, well, you can't duel the A9 because we're not going to let you. And then they demand that they should duel the A9. And then they're going to demand that they shouldn't duel the A9. And so it will go on and on and on and on into the future. This is just, political table tennis. You bat the ball over the net, you get batted back to you, and so it goes on and on and on. And this nonsense continues daily at Holyrood in what passes for debate. Plainly, it isn't debate at all. The other thing that has cropped up, I think it's safe to say, is the recent arrests of Scots people who were demonstrating against the genocide in Palestine. Now, this is a hot button topic for everybody, and I tend to steer clear of major international incidents and happenings, geopolitical wars and so on, in which everything is binary, everything is heavily slanted one way or the other. But in this particular case, there is something badly wrong, because the English government decided to impose a law which they created prescribing one single pro-Palestinian organisation. Now, in prescribing an organisation, what they effectively do is say that that organisation is illegal under their so-called Terrorism Act, and that anyone who supports it is aiding terrorism. The only problem with this is that law, that piece of legislation which emanated from Westminster, only applies in English law. It doesn't apply north of the border because, and this is something which unionists conveniently forget, that the Acts of Union in 1707 guaranteed that Scots law would persist in perpetuity here, and that means that no English laws can be applied retrospectively in Scotland, no matter what they are. And what really annoys me, and I think this is what gets me the most, is the fact that the so-called Police Scotland have taken it upon themselves to actually arrest people under this English law. Now, the Scottish police force are bound by Scots law, not English law. There's no such thing as UK law. It doesn't exist. There's Scots law and there's English law, and that is it. The poor Welsh don't have any say in the matter, because when their country was conquered by England, all their legal infrastructure was destroyed by the English conquerors and replaced with their own. So my apologies to people in Wales who are lumped in with England and Wales when it comes to this kind of legislation. But this proscription of an organisation which supports Palestinians in this Gaza conflict, which is not really a war, because mostly what's happening is a lot of civilians are being corralled into different places, and then they appear to be getting bombed. Now, that said, there are obviously Hamas fighters somewhere in amongst all the ruins and all the buildings that have been destroyed. And Israel is determined to root them out and destroy them all. But the collateral damage is enormous, and it's turned into a genocide as it's gone on. The fact that the British government thinks that it's okay to arrest people just for wearing a t-shirt that supports an organisation which they've decided is terrorist, even though there doesn't seem to be evidence to support that, doesn't work here. And Police Scotland, I think, need to be pulled up. Who are they accountable to exactly? The Scottish judiciary is legally bound under the treaties of the Act of Union to uphold the claim of right, which guarantees Scots law in perpetuity. They have no business in trying to impose English law on the citizens of Scotland, who are simply demonstrating their support for something. Now, freedom of action, thought, freedom of assembly are built into the Scottish constitutional settlement under the claim of right, which is accepted by the British government and by the British or English Parliament. The English Parliament accepts the claim of right as a lawful settlement in Scotland. That means they accept Scots law applies. They can't apply English law here. My question is, why has the police force in Scotland decided to throw its lot in with English law when plainly it doesn't apply here? Someone somewhere in the Scottish judiciary needs to have a word in the ear of the Chief Constable of Scotland and say, you can't do this here. Those people must be released. And that law, supposed British law, UK law, doesn't work here. It's unlawful. And for the police to take this kind of action should result in the people who are being unjustly incarcerated simply for wearing a t-shirt should be released, and they should be given compensation for their unpleasant experience. The police have no business arresting people for simply protesting. Now, I don't try not to take sides in things. I am heavily against genocide, whoever's doing it. And yes, I think countries have the right to defend themselves if they're attacked. That's also a right. But where does that response, that retaliation to an attack end and a genocide begin? Because that's what seems to have been lost in all the noise and fury coming from England. Anyway, these are the things which are annoying me at the moment, and I dare say they're annoying you as well. And you'll have heard myself and probably Nori Hutter on our Friday show, Hod Majaket, talking about the SNP not doing anything about this. Now, the SNP is plainly the target of Anas Sarwar's attacks about the dueling 9. And the BBC has been continuing to attack everything the SNP does, from ferries to roads, and they will continue to do that ad infinitum because they are a British institution. However, the Scottish side, we have, as somebody pointed out, only one party which is large enough and strong enough to form a government in the next Holyrood Parliament. Now, because the SNP is in that position, it's uniquely empowered to do things which the other smaller pro-independence parties can't do because they don't have the same heft. And one of those things would be to change the rhetoric coming out of the Swinney administration from supplication and acceptance of the Union and acceptance of all the things that are being done to Scotland, not for us, but to us, and to change that narrative to something different. For example, if Mr. Swinney decided to change his mind and said, instead of going on about JRR and, you know, human rights and all the minutiae that he's been involved with, the trans rights, and came out and said something like, if you vote for the SNP and we get into government and we get a majority of any sort, doesn't really matter what it is, then we will do several things. The first thing we will do is we will commit to holding a constitutional convention in which everyone in Scotland who has an interest in achieving independence will be invited to attend. And the purpose of that convention will be to formulate and to enact the next independence referendum, regardless of Section 30 orders. That would set the wheels in motion. People would support that. The SNP would get an enormous majority. They might even get an outright majority, which Mr. Sam had achieved in 2011 with such an offer. It's a big commitment, but the nice thing about doing it this way with the Constitutional Convention and inviting all other parties and groups involved in the independence campaign to come together means that the SNP would not be alone in doing so. That this responsibility for organising this referendum and defying Westminster, not asking for a Section 30 order, but scrupulously maintaining full democratic rules throughout this process, means that the responsibility for this activity, this creation of a new constitutional approach involving everybody fighting for independence to actually plan and execute a perfectly lawful referendum which allows the people of Scotland to decide whether or not they wish to continue in the Union any further or whether they would like to do something else. And that is not anti-democratic. Everybody would have a right to vote, even unionists who want to stay in the UK, and they're in a minority of about 20%, would get a vote in just the same way as they did the last time. The only difference this time would be that Scotland and Scots politicians, Scots legal eagles, Scots businesses and Scots people and groups and organisations, they would be the ones who create the rules of this referendum and enforce them. We cannot rely, incidentally, on the police force to enforce anything at all in Scotland, because it's very obvious that they are working to an English legal system which doesn't apply here. It's unlawful. In fact, they could be prosecuted for doing this under Scots law because they are introducing legislation which definitely does not apply here. And not only that, but they're arresting people under this phony legislation which doesn't apply here. And that's unlawful. So because we can't rely on the police to enforce order during this referendum, we would need to find some other way of making sure that demonstrations and campaigning were done safely without having to rely on a very dubious, politically motivated police force north of the border. Anyway, those are my thoughts today. They are a little cluttered and a bit unformed at the moment, but it's time that John Swinney stopped swithering. And if he can't stop swithering, hand over control to somebody who does have an idea how to get things done, because the SNP could be fantastically successful next year if they just adopted something similar to what I've just spoken about. The idea of committing to a full independence referendum by involving everybody in a constitutional convention would be the easiest and the most sensible and the most democratic way of achieving this, and it would give us the strength in numbers to challenge the UK's control over Scotland, which it doesn't have by law. It can't enforce or force its laws upon us. We need that kind of leadership and that kind of political party to make sure this happens. The SNP is the only party large enough to do this. The problem lies with its leadership. And I know plenty of SNP members who are screaming for this to happen, who want the party to take this kind of action, but they're largely being shut out of the debate by the central leadership. The political leadership at Holyrood is fingers in the ears, not listening. And so that needs to change. If it doesn't change, then the SNP's results the next year, I think, are going to be incredibly disappointing. Not only for them, but for the whole nation, who, let's face it, we have to place our trust in this party to get what is necessary, which is the freedom of the country back again, and the ability to change the course of this country for the better, instead of being shackled to a country which is hemorrhaging money in all directions and is pretty much bankrupt by itself and is only surviving by sucking the resources out of its near neighbour and using those to fund its own projects. So that's where I would leave it today. The dueling of the A9, one day it may happen, but it's not going to happen whilst the unionist parties are in power in Holyrood, or in any way able to mount some kind of majority against it. That needs to change, because to do things like dueling the A9, you need politicians there who are determined to do it. And at the moment, there aren't any. I say at the moment, that could change. I hope it changes. Anyway, that's it from IndyCar today. I hope you've enjoyed the programme. I will be back again with Nori on Friday morning at 9:30. So if you have any more comments or suggestions for that programme, please let me know. I'll try and include them with Nori in that show on Friday morning at 9:30. Please, in the meantime, keep liking, sharing, subscribing, commenting on this program. It drives the algorithm. It motivates me to make more content. If you can afford to make a contribution to my to my donation fund, please do so if you can afford it. That always helps me as well. And thank you to all those who are still donating on a regular basis. It really, really makes this much, much easier for me to do. Anyway, in the meantime, keep the faith, as I always say, and maybe things will change. Who knows? Let's hope so. I'll see you soon. Bye for now.